When my brother took the microphone and thanked everyone for trusting him with my father's company, I realized there was going to be a price for staying quiet all these years. People clapped, glasses touched. Someone adjusted the banner behind him because it was crooked. I checked my watch. It was 3:17 p.m., and the catered chicken was already cold. My brother smiled at me from across the room like I was a guest. That was the moment I understood that everything he believed he owned was about to disappear. When my brother took the microphone and thanked everyone for trusting him with my father's company, I realized there was going to be a price for staying quiet all these years. People clapped like they were watching a high school quarterback accept a scholarship. The room smelled like lemon cleaner and cheap champagne. Somebody had rented tall white heaters even though it was spring, and the heat made the air feel thick. I checked my watch out of habit. 3:42 p. The catered chicken on my plate had already gone cold, the skin turning dull and rubbery, and the paper napkin under my fork was damp from condensation. Behind my brother, the banner was crooked. Falcon Ridge Logistics. A new chapter, and a nervous event coordinator kept straightening it, stepping back, tilting her head, straightening it again. My brother, Kyle, stood like the room was built for him. He had my stepdad's jawline and my mother's smile, but none of my stepdad's caution. His suit was the kind that only looks expensive from 10 feet away. Up close, the stitching at the collar pulled slightly when he lifted his glass. He didn't notice. Kyle never noticed small things. He noticed applause. He noticed cameras. He noticed who was watching. My mom and Frank believed in me, he said, and he paused for the laugh he always got when he called my stepdad by his first name like that. They knew I'd keep this business in the family, keep it strong, keep it honest. I'm said, honest. That word landed wrong, like a shoe on a stair that isn't there. Two men at the front table, guys from the company's older days, drivers who'd started back when the fleet was 5 trucks and a rented garage, looked down into their drinks. They didn't clap. They didn't smile. Their hands stayed flat on the table. Fingers spread like they were holding themselves in place. The attorney beside my mother clapped politely with his fingertips, too controlled, eyes flicking to the binder in front of him like it might bite. My mother sat straight-backed in her pearl necklace and soft blue dress, the kind she wore to weddings and funerals. Her lipstick was still perfect, even though she'd been crying earlier in the day in the ladies' room. She dabbed at the corner of her eye with a tissue now, and nodded like everything was unfolding exactly the way it should. She didn't look at me. She hadn't really looked at me all afternoon. Frank would have hated this room. Frank had built Falcon Ridge Logistics out of a rusted pickup and a borrowed trailer. He hated public speeches. He hated banners. He hated people congratulating him for things that weren't done yet. His idea of celebration was a quiet steak dinner and paying off the last loan. But Kyle liked the idea of a legacy, the way some people like the idea of being famous. It didn't matter what it actually cost. I sat at the end of a round table near a potted plant that looked fake even though it was probably real. My hands rested in my lap, fingers folded, nails clean. I'd driven in that morning from Denver, 10 hours on the interstate, a gas station sandwich, and one stale cup of coffee that tasted like burnt plastic. I hadn't come for Kyle. I hadn't come for the banner. I'd come because my mom said it mattered, and because Frank was dead, and there were still things in this world with his name on them. The event was at a lakefront country club in Wisconsin, the kind of place where the carpet always looks new and the staff smiles without showing teeth. You could see the water through big windows, gray-blue under a cloudy sky. Boats moved slowly in the distance, like they had nowhere important to be. It should have felt peaceful. It didn't. Kyle lifted his glass higher. To family, he said. To loyalty. To the future. A little cheer went up from the cousins and friends who didn't know anything beyond the story my mom told. A photographer stepped closer. Someone's phone camera light blinked on. I didn't raise my glass. Kyle saw it. Of course he did. His eyes flicked to me, and the corner of his mouth tightened for half a second before the smile returned. He kept talking anyway, like my refusal was a small, stubborn thing he could laugh off later. I know there's been a lot of change, he said, voice warm, practiced, and I know Frank would want us to stick together. That's why the board and my mom have decided I'll be stepping in as CEO effective immediately. All contracts, all accounts, all assets. He said it like he was reading from a script. Like the words became real just because he spoke them in a room full of witnesses. The word assets made my stomach go still. My mother finally looked my way. Not fully. Just enough to send a message. Don't. Not here. Not now. That message had been her favorite my whole life. When I was 13 and Kyle was 17, he'd taken my birthday cash out of my dresser drawer and spent it on a video game console. I'd found the empty envelope and told my mother. She didn't ask Kyle. She didn't check his room. She said, "We don't accuse people in this family." Then she handed me $20 like it made it go away. When I got into the University of Illinois on a scholarship and told Frank at the dinner table, he said, "Good, learn something useful." Kyle rolled his eyes and said, "She's leaving because she can't stand losing." My mother laughed like it was a joke. When Frank started getting sick 3 years ago, and I drove out to Wisconsin to help, Kyle didn't show up until the last minute. He arrived with a new watch and a new girlfriend and a whole plan for what should happen when the time comes. Frank was too tired to argue. My mother was too scared, and I had already learned how to keep my mouth shut and take notes. I didn't hate Kyle. Hate takes energy. Kyle wasn't worth that much of me. What I felt was colder and cleaner. I watched him the way you watch a man swinging a hammer near glass. It's not personal. It's just a matter of time before something breaks. Kyle kept talking. The room kept clapping at the right moments. A waiter refilled water glasses. Somewhere behind me, a coffee machine hissed. Someone laughed too loud at a story that wasn't funny. And then Kyle said, "And I want to thank my sister Emma for being here today. Even though she chose to build her life somewhere else." A few heads turned toward me. Curious smiles. The kind that say, "Oh, that's her. The one who left." Kyle's eyes stayed on mine as he spoke. "It takes a lot to come home, doesn't it?" He meant it like a jab. A little public reminder of where I stood. I gave him a small nod, the kind you give a stranger who holds the elevator door. He blinked, like my calm response didn't fit his plan. Kyle lifted a folder from the table beside him. It had the company logo embossed on the front. Falcon Ridge's hawk in mid-dive. He tapped it once with his finger. "I've got the paperwork right here," he said. "Frank's final wishes. Everything clean and signed. No confusion. No fighting. Clean. Signed. No confusion." He said those words and my mind immediately went to a metal filing cabinet in my Denver apartment. Second drawer. Back folder. A manila envelope with a label I'd written in black marker 2 years ago. Lorraine Review. My pulse didn't race. It slowed. That's what happens when you stop hoping. Rebbiting. My pulse didn't race pauses. I watched Kyle's finger tap the folder again, proud, like it was a trophy. On my plate, the chicken sat untouched. The grease had soaked into the paper underneath, making a dark circle. My hands stayed in my lap. My phone rested against my thigh. Screen down. Silent. I could feel the edge of it through my dress fabric like a flat, cold stone. Kyle leaned into the microphone. "So, let's raise a glass to what Frank built," he said. "And to what I'm going to make it." The applause came again, stronger this time. People stood, chairs scraped. The photographer moved in closer to catch the moment. My mother rose too, tissue in hand, smiling through wet eyes, playing her part. I stayed seated. Kyle's smile strained. "Just a bit." The attorney's eyes flicked toward me again, then down quickly, like he didn't want anyone to notice. One of the old drivers at the front table pressed his lips together so tight they turned pale. Kyle's voice softened, the way it did when he wanted to sound generous. "Emma," he said into the microphone, "you want to say anything? For Frank?" My mother's head snapped toward me. Her eyes weren't pleading. They were warning. I stood anyway. Not fast, not dramatic. Just a steady push back of my chair, feet on the carpet, hands relaxed at my sides. I stepped around the table. I could hear my heels in the quiet gaps between claps. 3 steps. 4. The room was still applauding, but the sound started to thin as people realized I was moving toward the front. Kyle's smile widened like it was glued on. I stopped a few feet from him, close enough to see the faint sweat at his hairline, close enough to see a tiny smudge of champagne on his thumb from where he'd wiped his glass. I looked past him at the banner. Still crooked. Then I looked at my mother. Her hand hovered near her necklace like she was about to clutch it. I looked back at Kyle, and in the same calm voice I used when a federal auditor asked me a question I already knew the answer to, I said, "Kyle, what did you tell the DOT auditor when she asked where the fuel credit paperwork went?" The clapping didn't just stop. It died in midair. Hands froze halfway together. A cough sounded loud enough to be embarrassing. Somewhere, a fork dropped onto a plate with a sharp metal click. Kyle's face didn't change right away. That was the scariest part. For 1 second, he still looked like himself, still smiling, still in control. Then his eyes shifted. Just a flicker. Like a man spotting headlights in his rearview mirror. My mother whispered my name like it was a prayer and a threat at the same time. And in that silence, with the lake outside looking cold and indifferent, I understood exactly how fast a room can turn when the story people believed in starts to crack. Kyle stared at me like I'd spoken in a language he didn't know. His smile stayed in place, but it looked like something drawn on a mask. Behind him, the attorney's shoulders stiffened. My mother's face went pale in a way I recognized from every time she realized she couldn't talk her way out of something. Someone in the back of the room let out a nervous laugh, the kind that tries to turn disaster into a joke, but it died quickly because nobody joined in. Kyle cleared his throat into the microphone. "What are you talking about, Em?" he said, using the nickname he only used when he wanted to sound close to me in front of other people. "This is not the time." "That's funny," I said, still calm. "Because audit time always shows up when people say it's not the time." The microphone picked up my voice cleanly. Too cleanly. I could feel 100 people deciding whether to keep looking at me or look away. Kyle shifted his weight slightly. His suit jacket pulled across his stomach. The banner behind him tilted again, as if the air itself had moved. My mother took one step toward us, then stopped. She lifted her hands like she was going to touch my arm, but she didn't. She wanted to look like she was still in control. That was always her first instinct, even when control was long gone. "Emma," she said softly, like we were in a kitchen, and I'd knocked over a glass. "Please." That word "please" had been her favorite weapon since I was a kid. It was never a real request. It was a leash. It meant, behave. It meant, don't embarrass me. It meant, take the hit and keep the peace. Kyle lowered the microphone a little. He tried to laugh again, but it came out tight. "My sister works in compliance," he told the room, waving a hand like he was introducing a quirky hobby. "She thinks everything is an audit." A few people gave polite chuckles because they didn't know what else to do. The old drivers didn't laugh. The attorney didn't laugh. The event coordinator stopped straightening the banner and stood perfectly still, hands clasped in front of her like she was waiting for instructions. I didn't look at the crowd. I kept my eyes on Kyle. I watched the muscle in his jaw twitch once, the same way it did when he was trying not to show anger. I'd seen it when he was 16 and a coach benched him. I'd seen it when Frank told him no to a loan. I'd seen it when Kyle wanted something, and the world didn't hand it over. "This isn't about me," I said. "It's about the paperwork you keep losing." Kyle's eyes narrowed. His fingers tightened around the folder on the table. For the first time, I saw real fear flash across his face. It was quick, but it was there. Then he forced the fear back down and replaced it with the version of himself he sold to everyone: confident, wrong, and loud enough to drown out questions. "Okay," he said, stepping closer to me. "You want to do this? You want to start drama at Frank's memorial?" He said Frank's name like it was sacred, like he hadn't spent years treating Frank like a stepping stone. I leaned in just slightly so he could hear me without the microphone. "Frank would have wanted the truth," I said, "and you know it." Kyle's nostrils flared. He turned to the crowd again, trying to pull them back under his control. "Let's not ruin the moment," he said. "My sister's been gone for years. She doesn't know what it takes to run this business. She doesn't know the sacrifices." "Stop," I said, not raising my voice, just cutting through him. "You don't get to say sacrifice. Not after what you did." I preview. The room went still again. The lake outside looked flat and metallic, like a sheet of hammered steel. In the silence, I could hear the hum of the heaters and the faint clink of ice melting in glasses. Kyle's face reddened. "What I did?" he snapped. "I've been here actually working while you ran off to play spreadsheet hero in Colorado." I let that hang for a second. Then I nodded once, almost like I agreed with him. "Yeah," I said. "You stayed. You were close. You were the one Mom could show off at church. You were the one Frank could point to and say, 'That's my successor.'" My mother flinched at church. People around her knew exactly what that meant. That was where she built her image. That was where she collected sympathy when Frank got sick. That was where she told stories about what a good son Kyle was, and what a complicated daughter I was. Kyle opened his mouth again, but I didn't let him take the room back. I didn't have to. The question was already out there, hanging in the air like smoke. DOT auditor, fuel credits, missing paperwork. Those were not words people wanted near a business they just toasted. The attorney stepped closer, careful, like he was approaching a dog that might bite. Emma, he said quietly, can we talk somewhere private? I looked at him. His name was Richard Halvorson. He'd been Frank's corporate counsel for years, and he always wore the same expression, polite, slightly bored, like other people's problems were paperwork he hadn't filed yet. Right now, his eyes weren't bored. They were alert. He was measuring risk. We can talk, I said, but not because I'm trying to stir anything up. My mother's voice went sharper. Then why are you doing it? Why now? There it was. The real question. Not what Kyle had done. Not what was true. Just why I was ruining her day. Kyle answered for her. Because she's jealous, he said, loud enough for everyone. She can't stand seeing me take over. She wants attention. I turned my head slowly and looked at my mother. Do you really think that? I asked. My mother's mouth opened, then closed. She glanced at the crowd and gave a tight smile, like she wanted to move the whole moment back into a neat box. Emma, she said. We can't do this in front of everyone. That was her answer. I felt something cold settle deeper in me. Not surprise, not pain exactly, but confirmation. This was who she was. She would rather I be wrong than Kyle be guilty. She would rather I be quiet than the truth be loud. The crowd began to stir, whispering to each other. People looked down at their plates, at their phones, at the windows. Nobody knew where to put their eyes now. Kyle still held the microphone, but he wasn't speaking. He was waiting to see if someone else would save him. I didn't say anything more. Not yet, because the first rule of dealing with someone like Kyle is you never show your hand before the table is set. The room started to break apart into smaller clusters. My mother guided a few people toward the bar area with forced smiles, like she could redirect the energy if she kept moving. Richard Halvorson motioned toward a side hallway that led to a smaller lounge. Kyle leaned close to me. His voice dropped low, ugly. Whatever you think you're doing, he whispered. You're going to regret it. I met his eyes. That's the thing, I said, just as quietly. I already did my regretting. Richard opened the door to the lounge. The space inside smelled like leather and old coffee. There were framed photos of sailboats on the walls and a rack of brochures for weddings and golf tournaments. It was the kind of room people used to make uncomfortable conversations look respectable. Kyle came in behind us, still holding his folder like it was a shield. My mother followed, her heels clicking on the carpet, her face tight with panic masked as dignity. Richard closed the door. Okay, he said. Emma, explain what you meant. I didn't answer right away. I took a seat at the small table in the center. The chair was stiff, upholstered in beige fabric that had never seen real stress. Kyle stayed standing, arms crossed. My mother stood near the door like she wanted an escape route. I looked at Kyle's folder. Is that your clean and signed paperwork? I asked. Kyle lifted his chin. Yes, he said. Frank's wishes. The board documents. Everything. Let me guess, I said. You put together a nice binder, you got Mom to sign, you got Richard to stamp it, and you think that makes it true. Richard's eyes narrowed slightly. Emma, he warned. I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. I turned it over in my hands once, like I was deciding whether to flip a coin. Then I slid it onto the table, screen up, and unlocked it. My notes app was open. A list of dates and file names and short phrases. Kyle's gaze snapped to it. He saw the order, the precision, the way everything had been written down. My mother swallowed hard. Emma, she said again, softer. What is this? It's the timeline, I said. And it starts way before today. Kyle scoffed. You're making a list? Seriously? I ignored him and looked at my mother. Do you remember when Frank was still healthy enough to drive? I asked. My mother blinked, confused. Of course. Do you remember the day he picked me up from the airport and stopped at the gas station on County Road H? I said. He bought beef jerky and a scratch-off ticket and complained about the price of diesel. My mother's eyes shifted, searching her memory. I don't know. Kyle rolled his eyes. Why would she remember that? Because Frank did, I said. And because that was the day he told me something I didn't understand at the time. Richard leaned forward slightly. What did he tell you? I held my mother's gaze. He said, "If anything ever happens to me, don't believe what Kyle says. Believe what the paperwork says." Kyle's face tightened. "That's a lie." "It's not," I said. "And the reason I know it's not is because Frank wasn't the only one who said it." "Right." My mother's lips parted. "Who else?" I sat back in the chair, still calm, still steady. "Aunt Lorraine," I said. Kyle froze. His eyes flicked away from mine, and for the first time, I saw him lose control of his expression completely. It was just a crack, but it was enough. My mother whispered, "Lorraine?" Like she'd forgotten that name on purpose. "Yeah," I said. "Lorraine. The person Frank trusted when he didn't trust anyone else. The person who kept records when everyone else kept excuses." Kyle's voice rose. "She's not even involved anymore. She hasn't been around in years." I tilted my head slightly. "That's strange," I said, "because she called me 2 years ago and told me she'd been watching the company accounts like a hawk." Richard's eyes sharpened. "Emma," he said, slow. "What exactly did Lorraine find?" I looked at Kyle. I watched him swallow. I watched his fingers curl tighter around his folder, like he could squeeze the truth back inside it. And I said, "She found the money you thought nobody would notice." Kyle laughed once, sharp and fake. "What money?" he said. "You think you can walk in here with some story from Aunt Lorraine and—" "Stop," Richard Halverson said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried weight in that small room. He turned his head toward Kyle, and for the first time all afternoon, Kyle looked like he might actually listen to someone. "Let her speak." Kyle's jaw worked. He didn't sit down. He didn't relax. He stood there like a man daring the world to challenge him. My mother's hands were clasped so tight her knuckles looked white. The pearls at her throat rose and fell with her breathing. She was watching my face as if she could read what was coming next and somehow talk it out of existence. I kept my phone on the table. The screen glowed softly against the beige fabric. A list of dates. A list of names. A list of things that had been true whether my mother wanted them to be or not. "I didn't come here to accuse anybody without proof," I said. "That's not how I work." And Lorraine didn't call me because she was bored. She called me because she was scared. My mother blinked. "Scared of what?" I looked at her. "Of what Kyle was doing," I said. "And of what it would do to Frank's name." Kyle let out a snort. "Frank's name? I'm keeping his name alive." "You're trying to drag it through the mud." "No," I said. "You're using it like a shield. There's a difference." Too. Richard pulled out a small notepad from his jacket pocket, the kind lawyers carry like a reflex. He clicked his pen. "Start from the beginning," he said. "In order." I nodded. "Okay." I didn't start with the fancy stuff. I started with something simple. Something that sounded boring on purpose. Because the worst damage in a family like mine never started with a dramatic blow-up. It started with small, quiet thefts people pretended not to notice. 2 years ago, I said, I was in Denver. I'd been there for 6 years at that point. I'd moved after Chicago, after I realized I couldn't keep living within driving distance of a house where I was always the problem to manage instead of a person to respect. Kyle rolled his eyes. My mother flinched as if she wanted to stop me from saying that out loud, even in this private room. But she didn't interrupt. She couldn't, not with Richard sitting there. "I work in compliance," I continued. "Not because I love rules, because rules are what people hide behind until someone reads the fine print. I started as a junior compliance analyst for a company that hauled medical supplies and military shipments. Then I moved into federal contract work. Department of Transportation. Department of Defense. The kind of work that comes with audits, certification checks, strict fuel reporting, all of it. If you mess up, you lose contracts. If you lie, you lose your business." "Devret." Richard nodded once, like he already knew where this was heading. Kyle shifted his weight again. He was getting impatient. That impatience was always his tell. He could play charming for strangers. He could play confident for my mother. But he couldn't sit through detail. He couldn't sit through truth. "My job is to look at numbers until they confess," I said. Kyle scoffed. "Cute." "It's not cute," I said, still calm. "It's exhausting, but it trained me to notice patterns. And that's why Lorraine called me." My mother's voice came out thin. "Why would Lorraine call you?" "She doesn't like conflict. She's always been Harsh. I didn't correct the harsh comment. Lorraine was harsh. If you defined harsh as refusing to lie to protect someone's feelings. Lorraine called because she'd been on Falcon Ridge's board as an advisor, I said. Quietly. Frank asked her years ago, back when the company started getting bigger. She never wanted the spotlight. She wanted the structure. Kyle's eyes narrowed. She hasn't been involved in years. She stopped coming around because you made it impossible, I said. But she didn't stop watching. Kyle's face tightened again. My mother looked down at the carpet like she was trying to disappear into it. It was a Tuesday night, I said. Lorraine called at 8:42 p.m. I remember because I was still at my desk and my office lights were the only ones on in the building. I almost didn't answer because I didn't recognize the number. But something made me pick up. I paused just long enough to let them feel the weight of that choice. She didn't say hello, I said. She said, Emma, I need you to listen. And I need you to keep your mouth shut until you understand what you're looking at. Kyle laughed again, but it sounded brittle. She always did love the drama. Lorraine doesn't do drama, I said. She does warnings. And she was warning me that Falcon Ridge was bleeding money in places it shouldn't. Richard leaned forward. What kind of money? He asked. Federal money, I said. Grant money. Fuel credit reimbursements. Veteran-owned contract preferences. The stuff that makes a company look bigger and cleaner than it is. My mother's eyes widened. Falcon Ridge is veteran-owned, she said quickly. Frank was a veteran, I said. Kyle is not, and the company is only considered veteran-owned if the right person has the right controlling interest. That's not a matter of opinion. That's paperwork, Kyle snapped. Frank made me the successor. That's what everyone wanted. Richard's pen scratched lightly on his notepad. Continue, he said. I nodded. Lorraine told me she'd seen irregularities in the fuel credit reports. Falcon Ridge filed for reimbursements based on route logs and fuel receipts. Lorraine noticed the mileage didn't match the fuel volumes. She noticed the same receipt numbers appearing twice. She noticed subcontractor payments that didn't line up with signed delivery confirmations. Kyle's voice rose. That's accounting noise. That happens. No, I said. It doesn't happen like that. Not repeatedly. Not in a pattern. My mother looked at Kyle like she was about to defend him, but her voice didn't come. She was starting to feel the floor shift under her. Lorraine asked me to fly out that weekend, I said. Not to Milwaukee. Not to the house. To her place in Madison. My mother's brow furrowed. Why Madison? Because Lorraine didn't want Kyle or you to know, I said. My mother's face tightened like I'd slapped her. Why would she hide it from me? I didn't soften it. Because she didn't trust you to do the right thing if it was hard. That silence was heavy. My mother's lips trembled, but she didn't speak. She couldn't deny it, not after a lifetime of choosing the easy lie over the hard truth. I flew out Friday night, I said. Lorraine had a stack of documents on her dining table. Bank statements, route logs, vendor invoices, copies of grant applications. She had everything in color-coded folders like she was preparing for court. And she had one thing that made my stomach drop. Richard looked up. What? A list of payments to a company that didn't exist, I said. A vendor called Northline Fleet Solutions, supposedly for vehicle maintenance and emergency repairs. Kyle's eyes darted. Lorraine had looked up the address, I said. It was a UPS store. The phone number went to a prepaid cell line. The invoices were formatted wrong. The tax ID didn't match any registered business in Wisconsin. Richard's pen stopped. How much? He asked. Over 18 months, I said. Lorraine traced $680,000 paid out to that fake vendor. My mother's breath hitched. She put a hand over her mouth, as if trying to stop something from escaping. Kyle's face went red. That's insane, he barked. You can't just say numbers like that and, I'm not saying it, I said. Lorraine has it, and I verified it. I pulled public filings. I cross-referenced the bank statements with the invoices. I matched the dates to the company's internal maintenance logs. Richard looked at Kyle now with a cold, professional stare. Kyle, he said quietly, is there any legitimate explanation for a vendor using a UPS store address? Kyle's voice faltered for the first time. It's lots of small vendors do that. Not for nearly $700,000, Richard said. Kyle's eyes flashed with anger. You're taking her side? Richard didn't react. I'm taking the side of reality, My mother sank into the chair near the door. Her hands slid down to her lap. She looked smaller suddenly, like her confidence had been a costume, and someone had unzipped it. I kept going, because stopping now would only give them room to reshape the story. Lorraine didn't just find the fake vendor, I said. She found the way the company was being positioned to look compliant while it wasn't. She found subcontractor affidavits that were copied and pasted. She found signed delivery confirmations for routes that didn't exist. She found email chains with Kyle instructing the office manager to clean up certain files before an audit. Kyle slammed his folder onto the table. The sound cracked through the room. "Enough!" he snapped. "This is a witch hunt!" My mother flinched at the noise. Richard didn't. "What did Lorraine want you to do?" Richard asked me. I looked at him. "At first," I said, "she wanted me to tell Frank." He was still walking around, still driving sometimes, but he was slowing down. He didn't have the energy to fight Kyle and my mother at the same time. My mother's eyes flicked up sharply. "Don't blame me," I cut her off gently. That landed like a stone dropped in a quiet lake. "Lorraine said something that night," I continued, "and I'll never forget it. She said, 'Your mother will protect Kyle until there's nothing left to protect, and Kyle will keep taking until the only thing he has left is his own story.'" Kyle pointed at me. "She's poisoning you," he said. "No," I said. "She was warning me." And then she showed me the second thing she'd prepared. Richard's eyes sharpened again. "What second thing?" I took a breath, slow and steady. "A trust," I said. "Not for family money, for control. A compliance trust designed to trigger if Falcon Ridge ever faced federal investigation or contract suspension." Kyle froze. My mother's eyes widened, confused. Richard's pen hovered. "What do you mean, a compliance trust?" Richard asked carefully. I looked him straight in the eye. "I mean, Lorraine built a legal trap that only snaps shut when someone proves they deserve it," I said. "And Kyle's been walking closer to it every day, thinking the ground was solid." Kyle's voice dropped. "Dangerous. You're lying." I didn't move. I didn't blink. I glanced at the door. Through the wall, I could still faintly hear the noise of the crowd shifting, pretending this was just a temporary awkward moment. They had no idea. "And then," I said, "she told me exactly what my role would be when the trap finally snapped." Kyle's face held that frozen look for a few seconds, like his brain was trying to reject the idea before it could settle. Then his anger rushed in to fill the space. "There is no trap," he said. "There is no trust. Lorraine doesn't get to decide anything. Frank's dead. Mom's here. I'm here. That's the family." My mother's eyes flicked between us. Her lips moved like she was trying to form a sentence that would fix everything. She didn't find one. Richard Halverson stayed quiet, but he leaned forward, pen still in hand. "Emma," he said. "Careful now. You need to be very clear. What is Lorraine's legal connection to Falcon Ridge at this point?" I didn't hesitate. "Lorraine was Frank's designated compliance oversight," I said. "Not public-facing. Advisory. She wasn't on the website. She didn't attend your holiday parties. But she was listed in internal documents as the person authorized to review federal compliance filings if Frank couldn't." Kyle barked out a laugh. "Internal documents. You hear yourself?" Richard didn't look at him. "If those documents exist," he said, "they matter." My mother finally spoke, voice shaky. "Frank never told me that," she said. I nodded once. "I know," I said. "He didn't want to fight with you about it." Her cheeks flushed red. "Why would he need to fight with me?" "Because you always picked Kyle," I thought. But I didn't say it. I didn't need to. The truth was sitting in the room like a heavy piece of furniture none of us could move. I kept my voice steady. "Lorraine didn't come to me with feelings," I said. "She came with files. She came with dates. And she came with a plan." Traff. Kyle's fingers flexed around the edge of his folder. The folder looked suddenly flimsy in his hands, like cardboard pretending to be authority. "I stayed at Lorraine's place that weekend," I continued. "She didn't let me leave the table until I'd read everything. She made coffee so strong it smelled like burnt earth. The windows in her kitchen looked out over a backyard full of dead winter grass. And the whole time we worked, the only sound was paper sliding and her pen tapping the table when she wanted me to pay attention. With Sid. My mother stared at me. as if she couldn't connect that image of me sitting in a stranger's kitchen with the version of me she'd kept in her head. Difficult. Daughter. Emotional. Dramatic. I wasn't those things. I never had been. She just needed me to be those things, so she could keep Kyle as the hero. Lorraine showed me how the fraud worked, I said. Not just one fake vendor, but the system. She said Kyle was smart enough to hide small thefts inside big numbers. The company's fuel reimbursements, the subcontractor invoices, the emergency repairs. They were all supposed to be boring enough that nobody would look too hard. Richard nodded slowly. That's often how it's done, he said. Kyle snapped. You're acting like she's already proven something. Richard's gaze turned to him, flat. I'm acting like I'm listening, he said. You should try it. Kyle's mouth tightened. He glanced at my mother, looking for backup. My mother didn't move. She looked like she was bracing for impact. Lorraine asked me one question, I said. She asked, if I put control in the hands of the right person. My mother sucked in a breath. Her eyes flashed with hurt. Break my heart? She whispered, like she couldn't believe anyone would even consider her heart part of the equation. I didn't look away. Yes, I said, because Lorraine understood something you never wanted to see. You love Kyle in a way that makes you blind. Kyle's face twisted. This is disgusting, he said. You're attacking Mom now? No, I said. I'm describing the environment you built your life in, a place where you could do anything as long as you smiled while doing it. Richard's pen scratched again. So Lorraine created a trust, he said, pushing us back to the facts. Who set it up? Who signed it? Who funded it? It wasn't funded with money, I said. It was funded with authority, as a action. Kyle scoffed. Authority isn't a thing you can put in a trust. It is, Richard said quietly, if it's structured properly. My mother looked at Richard like she'd never seen him as anything other than an accessory to Frank's business. What does she mean? She asked. Richard didn't answer my mother yet. He looked at me. Go on, Emma. I nodded. Lorraine had documents drafted by a law firm in Milwaukee, I said. A trust agreement tied to Falcon Ridge's corporate governance and compliance obligations. It was designed to activate under specific conditions if the company faced federal contract suspension, if there was evidence of fraudulent filings, if an official audit found material misrepresentation. Kyle's voice dropped into a low, dangerous tone. You're telling a bedtime story. I kept going anyway. The trust named Lorraine as the initial trustee, I said, and it named a successor trustee if Lorraine was no longer able to serve. That successor trustee was me. My mother's eyes widened, stunned. You? She said. Because she trusted me, I thought. Because she saw me. Because she knew I wouldn't trade people's livelihoods for an ego boost. But I answered with the simplest truth. Because I know how the system works, I said. And because Lorraine knew Kyle would never stop unless someone stopped him. Kyle slammed his palm on the table. The sound made my mother jump. You can't just decide that, he barked. You can't just walk in and claim you have power. Richard's gaze stayed fixed on Kyle. If such a trust exists, he said, and if it was properly executed, yes, she can. Kyle's eyes went to Richard, then to my mother. Mom, he said, voice sharper. Say something. My mother's voice came out thin. Kyle, she whispered. Did you do any of this? Kyle stared at her like she'd betrayed him by even asking. Are you kidding me? He said. After everything I've done for you? You're going to believe her? My mother's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look away this time. She looked tired. She looked older than she had that morning. Just answer me, she said. Kyle turned his head sharply, like he couldn't stand being questioned. No, he snapped. I didn't. This is her trying to take what's mine. Richard tapped his pen once against his notepad. Emma, he said, do you have documentation? I didn't reach into my purse yet. I didn't pull out my trump card. Not in this room. Not with my mother sitting there, still half in denial. Not with Kyle's rage building. I'd learned the hard way that if you show everything too early, people scramble to rewrite reality around it. I have proof Lorraine exists, I said. And I have proof she's been watching. Tell her. Kyle barked out another laugh. Proof she exists? She's a person, Emma. I looked at him. She's a person you've been pretending doesn't matter, I said. And that's why you didn't see what she did. Richard's eyes sharpened again. Where is Lorraine? He asked. I answered honestly. She's in hospice, I said. She has cancer. She's been declining fast. That's part of why she called me 2 years ago. She didn't have time to wait for you to grow a conscience. 8. My mother pressed a hand to her mouth. Oh my God, she whispered. Kyle's face flickered, but not with sympathy. With calculation. Hospice meant time. Hospice meant people dying. Dying meant opportunities. Then this is even more messed up, Kyle said quickly, seizing the angle. You're exploiting a sick old woman. You're putting words in her mouth. I'm not, I said. Lorraine put her words in my ear while she was still strong enough to stand at her kitchen sink and wash dishes like nothing could touch her. Richard leaned back slightly. If she's in hospice, he said, then we may need to move quickly to confirm what you're saying. Kyle pointed at me. Confirm her lies, he said. She's the one causing this. My mother's voice rose, shaky and angry now. I looked at her. Frank would have wanted his employees paid, I said. Frank would have wanted the contracts protected. My mother's eyes brimmed. And what about family? She whispered. The question hung there. Family. I didn't answer right away. I looked at Kyle. Then I looked back at my mother. Family doesn't mean protecting someone while they burn everything down, I said. Kyle's face went red again. You're insane, he hissed. Richard stood up. Okay, he said firmly. Here's what we're going to do. Emma, you're going to provide whatever documentation you have. I'm going to review it. If there's any indication of federal exposure, we will take immediate steps to protect the company. Kyle stepped forward. Protect it from her, he said. Richard's eyes didn't leave Kyle's face. Protect it from risk, he corrected. And right now, Kyle, you are the loudest risk in this room. Kyle's hands clenched. He looked like he wanted to throw the folder. He didn't. He was still trying to hold on to control, but I could see it slipping. My mother whispered my name again, softer now. I swallowed. The answer was simple and brutal. Because you wouldn't have believed me, I said. You would have asked me to keep quiet. You would have asked Lorraine to back off. You would have told Kyle so he could cover his tracks. My mother's face crumpled. She didn't deny it. She couldn't. Richard turned to me. Emma, he said, if Lorraine named you successor trustee, the documents will show that. Do you have them? I looked at my phone, then at the purse on my lap. In my purse was a slim envelope, sealed, with Lorraine's handwriting on the front. I had brought it with me for a reason. I had carried it through the country club like a weight I didn't show. I met Richard's eyes. Not in my purse, I said. Not yet. Kyle's head snapped toward me. What do you mean, not yet? I stood slowly, pushing the chair back with a soft scrape. I looked at my mother, then at Kyle. Because Lorraine told me something else, I said. She told me the only way you'd be stopped is if you believed you'd already won. Kyle's face tightened. You're bluffing. I gave him a small, almost tired smile. It's already on its way. Richard's eyes narrowed. On its way from where? He asked. I didn't answer him directly. I looked at Kyle. From the one place you can't charm, I said. A federal office. With your name on a file. Kyle's expression shifted again. Fear, sharp and sudden. My mother made a small sound, like a gasp she tried to swallow. Outside the lounge door, the party noise had dropped to a low murmur. The celebration had stalled, like a car sputtering at a red light. People were waiting for the story to continue. They had no idea what was coming, and as Kyle stared at me, realizing he wasn't holding the room anymore, I felt the same cold certainty settle in my chest. The ending was already moving toward us. It was just a matter of time. Kyle's eyes flicked toward the lounge door like he was calculating whether he could walk out and still keep his crown. His breath came faster. He tried to hide it by lifting his chin. My mother watched him the way a person watches a child on a ledge, terrified, but still hoping it's just a misunderstanding. Richard Halverson held up a hand. Emma, he said, slow and firm, you've said enough to raise serious concerns. If you have information about an active federal investigation, I need specifics. Dates, agencies, any correspondence. Otherwise, this stays in the realm of family drama, and I'm not interested in family drama. Kyle pounced on that. See? He snapped. Even Richard thinks you're just making trouble. I turned my head and looked at Kyle like he was something on my shoe. Whine it. Kyle's face reddened again. I say file because that's what it is, I said. And you know it. My mother's voice cracked. Emma, she whispered. What did you do? It wasn't accusation. It was fear. She wasn't asking whether I'd done something wrong. She was asking whether I'd done something she couldn't undo. I didn't soften my answer. I did what Lorraine asked me to do, I said. I looked. I verified. I documented. And then I waited. Kyle let out a sharp laugh that sounded like it scraped his throat. Waited for what? For today? For your big moment? For you to claim ownership in public, I said. For you to lock yourself into a story you can't rewrite. Richard's eyes narrowed. Emma, he said again, I need clarity. What exactly is on its way? I reached into my purse and pulled out a folded printout. Not the envelope. Not the trust. Just a single page. The top was stamped with a date and a reference number. I slid it across the table to Richard. Kyle leaned forward automatically, but Richard placed his hand flat on the paper before Kyle could touch it. No, Richard said without looking up. That's not yours. Kyle froze, then stood back, anger burning hot in his eyes. Richard read the page carefully. His face didn't change much, but I saw his pupils tighten, the way they do when a lawyer's mind shifts from theory to damage control. He looked at the stamp, the reference number, the agency header. My mother leaned forward, trembling. What is it? She asked. Richard didn't answer her right away. He looked at me. Where did you get this? He asked. It was emailed to Lorraine's attorney 2 days ago. Kyle snapped. So you admit it. You planned this. I didn't deny it. I planned to tell the truth, I said. You planned a celebration built on lies. We're not the same. Richard finally spoke, voice controlled. This is a notice of intent to audit, he said. Department of Transportation Office of Inspector General. Specific to fuel credit reimbursements and subcontractor compliance claims. My mother's face drained. Audit, she whispered, like the word itself was poisonous. Kyle forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Audits happen, he said quickly. We'll handle it. It's routine. It's no Victor. Richard looked up at him. This is not routine, he said. And if the OIG is involved, that means someone escalated it. Kyle's gaze snapped back to me. You, he said. I kept my voice even. Not me, I said. Kyle's nostrils flared. I let the silence sit for a second. Then I said, someone who got tired of watching you treat the company like your personal ATM? It's not no dues. Richard's eyes moved between the two of us. He tapped the paper lightly. Emma, he said, this notice is dated for next week. It says they'll be requesting route logs, fuel receipts, subcontractor certifications, payroll records, and internal emails. Kyle's face tightened. He knew exactly what was in those files. He knew what wasn't. My mother pressed her palms to her knees like she needed something solid to hold herself up. Kyle, she said, voice small. What does this mean? Kyle snapped his head toward her. It means nothing, he said. It means we give them what they want and they go away. Richard didn't look convinced. That depends on what they find, he said. Kyle rounded on him. You're my lawyer, he said. I was Frank's lawyer, Richard corrected. And right now, my responsibility is to the company, not your ego. Kyle's face twisted with anger and something like betrayal. He couldn't stand the idea that loyalty had limits. My mother stood suddenly, her chair scraping the floor. No, she said, voice rising. This is not happening. Frank is gone. We're supposed to be healing. We're supposed to be together. Kyle reached for her, softening his voice instantly. Mom, he said, she's doing this. She's trying to take it from us. My mother turned toward me. Her eyes were wet. Emma, she pleaded, if you started this, you can stop it, right? You can fix it. Take steps. That was the moment I realized she still didn't understand. She thought consequences were like spills, something you wipe up quickly if you move fast enough. I can't stop it, I said. And even if I could, I wouldn't. My mother flinched like I'd slapped her again. Why? She whispered. I looked at her. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Because Kyle didn't just steal money, I said. He stole from drivers who trusted Frank. He stole from contracts that kept people employed. He stole from the idea that this company was different. Kyle's eyes flashed. Don't you dare act like you care about my employees, he snapped. You don't even live here. I nodded slowly. You're right, I said. I don't live here. But I read the emails you sent to the office manager, telling her to delay maintenance reimbursements for the drivers because you needed cash flow for other priorities. Kyle froze. My mother's mouth fell open. Richard's head snapped toward me. You have emails? He asked. I've seen them, I said. Lorraine has copies. Kyle's voice cracked with rage. That's illegal, he said. She stole company emails. Richard's stare turned icy. If Lorraine had authorized oversight, she had a right to review compliance-relevant communications, he said. And if those communications show intentional fraud, they'll be subpoenaed anyway. Kyle's hands clenched into fists. He looked like he wanted to punch something. But he couldn't. Not here. Not with Richard watching. Not with his mother shaking. The air in the lounge felt thin. The leather chairs smelled like old cologne. Outside the door, the party noise had shifted again. Less laughter now. More murmurs. Someone was probably asking where Kyle went. Someone was probably checking their phone to see if they should leave. Richard looked down at the notice again. Emma, he said carefully, you mentioned a trust. If this audit triggers something, explain exactly what you believe will happen. I took a breath. This was the part Lorraine had drilled into me. Keep it simple. Keep it factual. Let them hang themselves with their own assumptions. The trust isn't about money, I said. It's about control and protection. Lorraine worked with Frank before he died. They knew Kyle was moving too fast, cutting corners. Frank wanted to believe Kyle would grow into it. Lorraine didn't. Kyle snapped. Frank did not do anything behind my back. I looked at him. Frank did things behind your back because you never listened when he said no, I said. My mother's voice broke. Frank wouldn't. Richard held up his hand. Let her finish, he said. I continued. Lorraine set up a compliance trust tied to Falcon Ridge's corporate governance, I said. If the company faces a federal audit for fraud, or if the board receives a formal notice of investigation, the trust activates. It temporarily transfers voting control and operational authority to the trustee to protect the company and preserve contracts. Kyle stared at me. That's not real, he said. That's insane. Richard's eyes stayed on the notice. It could be real, he said, almost to himself. My mother's hands flew up to her chest. Transfer control to who? She asked. I looked at her. Lorraine was the trustee, I said. But she's in hospice. The successor trustee is me, Graham Bix. The words landed like a heavy object dropped onto the table. My mother made a small sound, half gasp, half sob. Kyle's face went almost purple. No, Kyle said, voice rising. No, that can't happen. She can't just, you can't just. Richard's voice cut through him. Kyle, he said, if such a trust exists and was properly executed, yes, it can happen. Kyle turned on Richard like a cornered animal. You're supposed to be on my side, he hissed. Richard didn't blink. I'm on the side of keeping Falcon Ridge alive, he said. If there's fraud exposure, the company could lose contracts, lose certifications, face fines, even criminal referrals. Whoever's in charge must be able to show cooperation and corrective action. Kyle spun toward me again, eyes wild. You set me up, he said. I didn't deny the part that mattered. Lorraine warned you, I said. My mother's voice was barely audible. Emma, she whispered, what are you going to do? I looked at her and felt something old in my chest. An echo of the girl who used to hope her mother would choose her once, just once. That girl was gone now. In her place was someone who understood the rules of this family. I'm going to do what Frank asked for, I said. I'm going to protect what he built. Kyle's lips curled. By taking it, he spit. I leaned forward slightly. By saving it, I corrected. Richard folded the notice carefully and slid it back toward me. If this is accurate, he said, we need to prepare immediately. We need to locate Lorraine's documents. We need to review corporate governance, confirm authority, and determine the board's obligations. Kyle's head snapped up. Bored? He said. What board? I'm the CEO. Richard's expression didn't change, but his voice sharpened. As of this moment, Kyle, you are the man who just announced he's CEO at a party, he said. That's not the same thing as legal authority. Kyle stared at him, stunned. My mother's eyes widened again. The room felt smaller, tighter, like the walls had moved in. And in that moment, I realized Kyle still believed he could talk his way out. He still believed charm was stronger than paper. He still believed my mother's love was stronger than the law. He was wrong. Outside the lounge door, I heard a faint knock, 3 taps. Hesitant. The event coordinator's voice filtered through, nervous. Kyle? Everyone's waiting. Kyle didn't answer. He just stared at me, breathing hard, like he was seeing me for the first time in his life. I stared back, calm as a locked file cabinet. Because the collapse wasn't coming someday. It had already started. The knock on the door came again, a little more insistent. Kyle? The event coordinator repeated, voice tight with that practiced politeness people use when they're afraid they're about to be blamed. They're asking if you're coming back out. Kyle finally moved. He dragged in a breath and forced his shoulders down, like he was trying to reset his body into the confident shape he wore in public. He wiped his palm on his suit pants, then picked up his folder again and tucked it under his arm. We're fine, he called toward the door, voice too loud. Tell them, we'll be right out. The coordinator didn't answer, but I heard her footsteps retreat down the hallway. My mother looked like she might faint. Her face had gone waxy, and she kept swallowing like she was trying to push down panic. Richard Halverson watched her with the detached concern of someone who'd seen people fall apart in conference rooms before. Sit, Richard told my mother gently. I am sitting, she snapped, though she wasn't. She was hovering, half leaning on the back of a chair. Then she seemed to realize how weak she looked and lowered herself into it. Hands trembling, Kyle turned to Richard. This is ridiculous, he said. You're letting her hijack Frank's memorial. You're letting her threaten the company. Richard's voice stayed level. Nobody is hijacking anything, he said. We're addressing a legal issue. Kyle pointed a finger at me. She's lying about Lorraine, he said. Even if there's an audit, it doesn't mean anything. And even if Lorraine drafted some document, Frank's dead. Mom owns his shares. Mom can decide what happens. My mother blinked at that, grateful for the chance to be useful. Yes, she said quickly. I'm the widow. I'm the beneficiary. Richard held up a hand. Marilyn? He said, using her name like a pin, pushing her back into reality. Ownership and control are not always the same thing. And I don't know what documents Frank signed with Lorraine. Kyle's eyes widened. You were his lawyer, he said. How could you not know? Richard's mouth tightened. Because Frank didn't always run everything through me, he said. Sometimes he used other counsel. Sometimes he made arrangements privately. Sometimes he did that specifically to avoid family conflict. My mother's face tightened. Frank didn't keep secrets from me. I looked at her. He did, I said. He kept them because you punished him when he told you the truth. My mother's eyes flashed with anger and hurt. That is not fair, she said. It's accurate, I said. Kyle stepped closer to me, voice low. You're enjoying this, he hissed. I didn't flinch. No, I said. I'm enduring it. There's a difference. Richard stood. Okay, he said. We're not going to solve the family portion of this in a lounge. Here's what matters. An OIG audit notice exists. That means we need to prepare. And if Lorraine built a governance mechanism tied to compliance events, we need to locate it immediately. Kyle snapped. There is no mechanism. Richard's eyes turned to him. Then you should have no problem providing full access to records, he said. And you should have no problem with a third-party review. If you're confident, you'll cooperate. Kyle's jaw worked. He didn't answer because he couldn't answer without exposing himself. My mother looked at me again, voice smaller. Emma, she said, what do you want? It was the same question she'd asked when I was a teenager and Kyle took my money. What do you want? As if justice was a craving I should get over. I kept my tone plain. I want Falcon Ridge to survive, I said. And I want the people who work for it to stop paying for Kyle's decisions. Kyle made a scoffing sound. You don't care about them. You care about humiliating me. I turned my head slightly. If humiliation was the goal, I said, I would have done it differently. Richard rubbed his forehead once. A quick gesture of stress. Emma, he said. You mentioned that proof is on its way. What exactly did you mean? I leaned back in the chair and looked at my phone again. I hadn't touched it since I slid the audit notice across the table. The screen had gone dark. I woke it with a tap. I meant that Lorraine didn't just prepare documents, I said. She prepared a sequence. Definite. Kyle frowned. A sequence, he repeated, like he couldn't decide whether to mock it or fear it. Lorraine knew Kyle wouldn't stop unless the consequences were unavoidable, I said. And she knew my mother would always try to negotiate. So she created a plan that doesn't require anyone's permission once it starts. My mother's face crumpled. Permission? She whispered. From me? I didn't answer her directly. I turned to Richard. A man named Thomas Keene. He's in Madison. He's the one who helped draft the trust and who holds the executed copies. Richard nodded. I know Keene, he said. He's reputable. Kyle cut in. So you're admitting it exists, he said, voice rising. You're admitting you're trying to take control. I'm admitting Lorraine built something, I said. And I'm admitting you're standing in its path. Kyle's face twisted. Call her, he said. Call Lorraine right now. Put her on speaker. Let her tell us. I shook my head. She can't, I said. She's sedated most of the day, and even if she could, she wouldn't. She didn't want this to become a shouting match where you could charm or bully your way into doubt. Kyle's eyes went to my mother. Mom, he said urgently, tell her to stop. Tell her she can't do this. My mother's lips parted. She looked at me, then at Kyle, then at Richard. For a moment, she looked like a woman caught between two lives. The life where she protected Kyle no matter what, and the life where she acknowledged that protecting him had destroyed her family. I don't know what to do, she whispered. That was the first honest thing she'd said all day. Richard spoke before I could. Marilyn, he said, what you do right now is you stay calm and you let the professionals handle this. Kyle scoffed. Professionals, he repeated, bitter. Like Emma, like Lorraine. I stood up, slow and steady, and looked at him. Rules are what keep people from getting hurt by someone who thinks love is a shield, I said. Kyle's eyes burned. You're accusing me of hurting people, I nodded. Yes, I said. Kyle's voice cracked with rage. I'm the one who was here, he shouted, forgetting for a moment that we were behind a door in a building full of guests. I handled the trucks. I handled payroll. I dealt with Frank when he was sick. You weren't here. You don't get to come back and rewrite history. My mother flinched at his raised voice. Richard's expression stayed flat. I didn't match Kyle's volume. I didn't need to. You didn't handle Frank, I said. You handled the perception of Frank. Kyle's eyes widened. What does that even mean? It means you were in the room when it made you look good, I said. And you were gone when it was hard. Annette. Kyle took a step toward me, fists clenched. Richard shifted slightly, ready to intervene if Kyle lost control completely. My mother stood too, shaky. Kyle, she said, voice pleading. Stop. Kyle stopped, but his breathing stayed hard. He looked at my mother like she'd failed him, like she wasn't protecting him the way she always had. Richard glanced at his watch. We need to move, he said. Emma, can you contact Keene right now? Tell him we need the trust documents immediately. Versed Welbane. I nodded. I already did, I said. This morning, before I walked into this building. Kyle's head snapped toward me. You what? I met his eyes. I told him today was the day Kyle would claim control publicly, I said. I told him to be ready. Kyle's voice went low. You planned to ambush me at Frank's memorial. I didn't argue about the word ambush. I planned to stop you, I said. There's a difference. Richard's face tightened. What did Keene say? I lifted my phone slightly, showing the screen. A short text thread, Keene's name at the top. The last message from him. Courier scheduled. Documents en route. ETA 4:10 p.m. Richard read it and exhaled through his nose. A courier, he said. Physical delivery. Lorraine didn't trust email, I said. She said paper is harder to pretend you never saw. Kyle's face went pale again. 4:10, he whispered, doing the math. That's in about 40 minutes, I said. My mother stared at the phone screen like it was a bomb. "What documents?" she asked, voice trembling. I looked at her. "The trust agreement," I said. "The board resolutions tied to it. Frank's signed acknowledgement. Lorraine's authority. My successor designation. Everything." My mother's eyes filled again. "Frank signed something that makes you—" "Frank signed something that protects Falcon Ridge," I corrected. "He didn't sign it to punish you. He signed it because he couldn't fight you anymore." Kyle let out a harsh laugh. "He wouldn't do that," he said, but his voice lacked conviction now. Richard straightened his tie, like he was bracing for a legal storm. "When those documents arrive," he said, "we'll need to convene the board immediately, and we'll need to decide whether Kyle should step away pending review." Kyle exploded. "Step away?" he shouted. "From my own company?" Richard's voice stayed calm. "From the company Frank built," he said, "until we know whether you put it at risk." Kyle stared at Richard like he couldn't believe the betrayal. Then he turned on me, eyes sharp and wet with rage. "You think you're better than me," he said. I shook my head. "No," I said. "I think I'm quieter than you. And quieter is harder to catch." My mother made a small sound, like she was choking on sobs. "Emma," she whispered, "please don't do this." End quote. I looked at her and felt a familiar ache, old and dull. She still thought this was something I was doing to them. She still couldn't see that it was something Kyle had done, over and over, until the system finally noticed. "I'm not doing this," I said softly. "Kyle did it. I'm just the one who stopped pretending." Outside the lounge door, voices rose. Someone called Kyle's name again, louder. The party was restless. People were sensing the shift. They were sensing that the story was not going to end the way they expected. Kyle straightened his shoulders again, forcing on that confident posture like armor. "Fine," he said, voice tight. "Bring your papers. Bring your courier. We'll see what it says." He leaned closer to me. "But when this blows up in your face," he whispered, "don't come crying to Mom, because you'll have destroyed everything." I held his gaze. "No," I said. "You already did. I'm just letting everyone see it." Ding. Richard opened the lounge door. The noise of the event rushed in. Voices, clinking glass, forced laughter that sounded thinner now. Kyle stepped out first, smiling like nothing was wrong. Folder under his arm. My mother followed, face strained. Richard and I came last. And as we walked back into that bright room with the crooked banner and the cold chicken, I could feel the countdown ticking in my bones. 40 minutes until the papers arrived. 40 minutes until Kyle's story collapsed in front of everyone who had clapped for him. Kyle walked back into the main hall like he owned the air. He put his smile back on so fast it was almost impressive, and he lifted his hands as if he was calming a crowd at a pep rally. "Sorry, everyone," he said, voice bright. "Just a quick family thing. You know how it goes." A few people laughed politely. Most didn't. The room had shifted. You could feel it in the way conversations didn't resume at full volume. People kept glancing toward the side hallway, as if the truth might walk out behind us. My mother moved straight to the bar and asked for water. Not wine, not champagne. Water. Her hands were shaking so badly the bartender pretended not to notice and slid the glass toward her with two hands like it was delicate. Richard Halverson didn't go back to the front. He stayed near the edge of the room, phone in his hand now, typing with quick, controlled motions. He looked like a man already building a wall before the flood hit. I walked back to my table and sat down. My chair felt colder than before. My plate was still untouched. The chicken skin had dried at the edges. The room smelled different now, less like lemon cleaner, more like sweat and stale perfume. Kyle went back toward the microphone, still holding that folder like it could protect him. He tapped it against his palm once, a nervous habit he didn't realize he had. Then he turned to the crowd and raised his glass again. "Where were we?" he said. "Right. To Frank." He said Frank's name louder this time, like volume could replace sincerity. He started talking again about legacy, about honoring Frank's work, about keeping the company strong. But the words were no longer landing. People were listening differently. They weren't cheering. They were watching. The two older drivers at the front table still didn't clap. One of them, a thick-armed man with a weathered face, stared at Kyle like he was waiting for something to finally catch up. The other kept rubbing his thumb over his wedding ring, slow and repetitive, like it was a grounding ritual. Kyle noticed their silence. His smile tightened. He shifted, and the collar seam of his suit pulled again. He tried a new angle. I know there's been some concern, he said, letting his eyes flick toward me for half a second. But I want everyone to understand that Falcon Ridge is solid. We're strong. We're not going anywhere. He was talking to the room, but he was arguing with me. My mother stood near the window, water glass in hand, staring out at the lake like she wanted it to swallow her. When she turned back, her eyes met mine briefly. They were glossy and frightened, but underneath that was something I hadn't seen in years. Doubt. Real doubt. Not doubt in me. Doubt in Kyle. Kyle kept speaking, forcing the event back on track. People pretended to follow. A cousin restarted a conversation about the food. Someone laughed at the wrong moment. The photographer stepped back, unsure whether to keep shooting. The banner stayed crooked. At 3:32 p.m., my phone buzzed in my lap. One vibration. Short. I didn't pull it out. I didn't need to. I already knew. The countdown was still running. Kyle stepped down from the microphone and began circulating, shaking hands, accepting congratulations that sounded a little quieter than before. He stopped at my table, putting his hand on the back of an empty chair like he might sit. Well, he said, still smiling, you've definitely got a flair for timing. I didn't smile back. He leaned closer, voice low enough that only I could hear. You want to play compliance cop? He whispered. Go ahead. I've got nothing to hide. I looked up at him. His pupils were slightly wider than normal. His breath smelled faintly of champagne and mint gum. His hand on the chair tightened, knuckles whitening. You don't even believe that, I said quietly. Kyle's smile faltered. Believe what? That you have nothing to hide, I said. If you believed it, you wouldn't be hovering over me like this. Kyle's face flushed. I'm making sure you don't embarrass Mom again, he snapped, then softened instantly as someone walked by. Hey, Aunt Trish, he called out, waving. Good to see you. Aunt Trish smiled uncertainly and kept walking, eyes flicking between us like she was watching a scene she didn't want to be in. Kyle turned back to me, smile gone again. You think you're smart, he said. You think paperwork makes you powerful. It makes the truth durable, I said. Kyle's jaw twitched. You always did love being right, he muttered. I didn't correct him. Being right was never what I loved. I loved being free, and being free meant not letting people rewrite me. Kyle walked away, shoulders stiff, forcing himself to keep greeting people like he wasn't unraveling. My mother watched him go, and her face tightened in the way it does when a mother realizes her child isn't who she thought he was. At 3:45 p.m., Richard came over to my table. He didn't sit. He leaned slightly and spoke low. Keene confirmed the courier is on the road, he said. He's sending the documents to the club's business office. They'll call when it arrives. Number 5. Thanks for watching. 1422. I nodded. Okay, I said. Richard studied my face. You seem very calm, he said. I glanced at the lake through the windows. A boat moved slowly across the water, leaving a thin wake. I spent years being told I was overreacting, I said. So I learned to react privately. Richard's mouth tightened. If this goes the way you think it will, he said, it's going to be ugly. I know, I said. That's why Lorraine didn't want me to warn anyone. She said if you warn people like Kyle, they don't change. They hide. Richard nodded once, as if he understood that deeply. He walked away again, back toward the edge of the room. My phone buzzed a second time at 3:52. Still just one vibration. Short. Controlled. I kept it in my lap and stared at my plate like it was any other day. At 4:82 the country club's manager approached Kyle. I saw it from across the room. The manager was a tall man with silver hair and a careful smile. He leaned in, said something quietly. Kyle's face tightened. He nodded once, then followed the manager toward the hallway that led to the business office. My mother saw Kyle move and immediately followed, as if pulled by a string. She didn't look back at me. She didn't need to. Her body already knew where her loyalty wanted to go. Richard moved too, faster this time. He threaded through the clusters of guests and headed toward the hallway. The old drivers watched him go with the same tense focus they'd had all afternoon. I stood up and walked after them. Not rushing, not dramatic, just steady. As I entered the hallway, the noise of the party faded behind me. The carpet muffled footsteps. The air smelled like polished wood and stale coffee. Ahead, I could hear Kyle's voice, sharp and irritated. "What do you mean you can't just give it to me?" he snapped. The manager's voice was calm. "Sir, it's addressed to Mr. Halverson," he said. "And there are legal delivery instructions." Kyle's voice rose. "I'm the CEO. This is my company. Give me the package." I rounded the corner and saw them in the small business office. The manager stood behind a counter. Richard Halvorson was there, hand outstretched, while Kyle paced like a caged animal. My mother stood near the door, hand pressed to her mouth, eyes wide. On the counter sat a thick envelope, brown, sealed, with a red strip across the flap that said, "Legal documents enclosed." There was a signature sticker on the front and a line of handwriting I recognized immediately. Lorraine's tight, neat script. Kyle saw me and his face flushed. "This is what you've been waiting for," he said, voice dripping contempt. "Your little paper bomb." I didn't answer him. I walked up beside Richard and looked at the envelope. The handwriting on the front wasn't addressed to me. It was addressed to Falcon Ridge Logistics Board Counsel, Richard Halvorson, with instructions, "Open immediately upon receipt." Richard's fingers hovered for a second. Then he broke the seal carefully, like he was opening something fragile and dangerous. He slid the contents out onto the counter. Several stapled packets, a notarized affidavit, and a folder labeled Compliance, Trust Activation, Falcon Ridge Logistics. Kyle reached forward. Richard put his arm out to block him. "No," Richard said sharply. Kyle's eyes went wild. "You're not going to cut me out," he hissed. Richard didn't look at him. He looked at the top page, scanning. His face didn't change much, but his shoulders lowered in a way that told me something had become final. My mother leaned forward, voice trembling. "Richard," she whispered. "What is it?" Richard looked up slowly. "It's real," he said. Kyle's chest rose. "What's real?" he demanded. Richard turned a page, then another, eyes moving quickly. "A trust agreement," he said. "Executed. Notarized. Board resolutions attached. Frank's signature is here." My mother made a choked sound. Richard nodded. "Yes," he said. "And Lorraine signed as trustee." Kyle shook his head hard. "No," he said. "No. This is forged." Richard's eyes snapped up. "It's not forged," he said. "There's a notary acknowledgement and witness signatures, and there's a corporate resolution recorded with the company's internal governance file." Kyle's breathing turned rough. "So what?" he snapped. "What does it even do?" Richard read the bolded section out loud, voice steady. "Upon receipt of formal notice of audit or investigation by a federal agency pertaining to compliance, financial reporting, or certification status," he read, "operational authority and voting control shall temporarily transfer to the acting trustee to preserve corporate integrity, protect contracts, and implement corrective measures." Kyle's face went pale. "Temporarily transfer to who?" he whispered, though he already knew. Richard's eyes lifted and landed on me. "Successor trustee," he said. "Emma Mercer." My mother sagged against the doorframe like her bones had given up. Kyle stared at me like he was looking at a stranger holding a match over his whole life. And in that quiet office, with the party still humming faintly down the hall, I watched the first piece of his certainty crack clean in half. Kyle's mouth opened, but nothing came out at first. His eyes stayed locked on the page like he was trying to force the ink to rearrange itself into a different reality. The manager behind the counter looked uncomfortable, but he kept his hands folded like he'd been trained for moments when rich families start imploding in polite buildings. My mother slid down into the chair by the door as if her legs couldn't hold her anymore. She didn't sob. She didn't scream. She just stared at the documents like they were a death certificate. Richard Halvorson kept reading, flipping pages with controlled movements. I could tell he was looking for weaknesses. Lawyers always look for weaknesses, even when the documents support what they want. He was scanning for loopholes Kyle could exploit, some technicality that would turn this into months of chaos. Kyle finally found his voice. "That's not possible," he said, voice hoarse. "You can't just hand her my company." "Thanks." Richard didn't look up. "This isn't your company," he said. Not in the way you keep saying it is. Kyle's hands clenched. It's my life, he snapped. I spoke calmly. Then you should have treated it like something you'd lose, I said. Kyle spun toward me, face red. You set this up, he said. You and Lorraine. You manipulated Frank when he was sick. My mother flinched at Frank's name like it was a hot surface. Kyle, she whispered. Stop. Kyle ignored her. He pointed at me like I was on trial. She poisoned him, he said to Richard. She convinced him I was a threat. Frank wouldn't have done this otherwise. Richard finally looked up, eyes sharp. Kyle, he said, Frank signed this 2 years ago. That was before his final decline. His signature matches the ones I have on file. The notary is legitimate. The witnesses are legitimate. And the trust activation clause requires a federal audit notice. Kyle's eyes darted. We don't have an audit, he said quickly. Richard's expression didn't change. We do, he said. Emma provided the notice. It's dated. It's addressed to the company. It cites specific compliance categories. The trigger condition is met. Kyle's breathing turned fast again. Then we deny it, he said. We fight it. You don't deny a federal audit notice, Richard said. You comply. Kyle slammed his hand on the counter. The sound made the manager jump slightly. This is insane, Kyle barked. You're going to let her walk in and take over just because some paper says so? Richard's voice stayed controlled. It's not some paper, he said. It's governance. It's the structure that decides who has authority when the company is at risk. Kyle's gaze flicked to my mother. Mom, he said, voice pleading now, desperate. Say something. Tell him you don't accept this. My mother stared at him, tears finally sliding down her cheeks without sound. Frank signed it, she whispered, like she was saying it to herself more than to him. Frank signed it, Kyle's face twisted. Because she made him, he said. My mother shook her head slowly. Frank didn't do things because people made him, she said, voice breaking. Frank did things because he was tired. That admission hit Kyle like a punch. He stared at her, stunned. Because for the first time, my mother wasn't defending him. Not fully. Not with conviction. She was acknowledging that Frank had reached a point where he stopped trying to convince her of anything. Richard gathered the documents into a neat stack. We need to convene the board immediately, he said. Not next week. Not after the audit. Now, Kyle laughed, sharp and ugly. Board? He said. Who even is the board? My mom? A couple of drivers? You? Richard's eyes narrowed. Falcon Ridge has a corporate board, he said. Frank kept it small, but it exists, and the trust documents specify emergency governance procedures. Emma's authority is temporary but binding. Kyle turned toward the manager. Get out, he snapped, as if he could control the room by throwing people out. The manager's smile tightened. Sir, this is the business office, he said politely. I'm going to step outside and give you privacy. But I need to remain available if the club requires assistance. He walked out quickly, closing the door behind him. The hallway felt quieter suddenly, as if the building itself was holding its breath. Kyle rounded on me again, voice low. So what now? He hissed. You march into my office and start firing people? I shook my head. I'm not here to punish employees, I said. I'm here to stop the bleeding. Kyle's lips curled. You keep saying that like you're some hero. I'm not a hero, I said. I'm a person who can read a ledger. Richard's phone buzzed. He checked it, then looked up. The board members are already here, he said. Frank's old operations lead is in the hall. 2 drivers, and the accountant. I told them to come as soon as I got your notice, Emma. Kyle stared at him. You told them? He spat. Behind my back? Richard didn't flinch. In front of your risk? He said. Yes. My mother wiped her cheeks with a trembling hand. Can't we just talk about it as a family? Richard's expression softened slightly, but his voice stayed firm. Marilyn, he said, this is beyond family now. Federal agencies do not care about family feelings. Kyle paced, hands running through his hair. His suit jacket shifted, pulling at the seams. He looked younger suddenly, like a boy who'd been told no for the first time. He stopped and pointed at me again. This isn't over. he said. You might get your little trust, but you don't know how to run a trucking company. I didn't argue. You're right, I said. I don't know how to dispatch trucks or negotiate tire contracts. Kyle's eyes flashed. You're acting like you already know we're guilty, he said. I held his gaze. I know what Lorraine found, I said. And I know what the audit is going to ask for. Richard stepped toward the door. We're doing this now, he said. Emma, bring the documents. Kyle, you are welcome to attend, but you will not lead. Kyle's laugh came out cracked. I'm not taking orders from her, he said. Richard looked at him hard. Then, you can leave, he said. But understand this. Refusal to cooperate will be noted. And in this environment, that matters. Kyle's shoulders rose. He looked like he wanted to explode again. Then he caught himself, took a breath, and forced his voice into something smoother. Fine, he said. I'll cooperate. I'll sit in your little meeting. And when this collapses, I'll remind everyone who started it. He looked at me when he said it, eyes sharp, promising revenge. I didn't react. I'd already lived through his threats. They were always loud. The law didn't care about loud. We walked down the hallway toward a smaller conference room the club used for business events. A staff member opened the door and stepped back. Inside was a long table, bottled water lined up neatly, a pitcher of iced tea sweating onto a napkin. The air conditioner hummed. The board members were already there. I recognized two of them from the main hall. The older drivers, both standing near the window, faces tense. A woman in her 50s with short gray hair sat with a notebook open in front of her. Tanya, the company accountant. Frank had trusted her for years. Beside her was a man I'd met only once. Months ago. When Frank was still alive. Ray. Operations lead, broad-shouldered, and quiet. The kind of man who does the work without needing applause. They all looked up when we entered. Their eyes moved to the stack of documents in Richard's hands. Then to me. Then to Kyle. The room felt charged. Like the moment before a storm breaks, Richard placed the trust documents in the center of the table. Thank you all for coming on short notice, he said. We have received a federal audit notice, and we have received governance documents, executed by Frank Mercer and Lorraine Hayes. Those documents activate an emergency compliance trust. Under the terms of that trust, Emma Mercer is the acting trustee and has temporary authority to direct compliance actions. Kyle shifted in his seat, jaw clenched, trying to look bored. He wasn't bored. His leg bounced under the table. Ray leaned forward, eyes on Richard. Frank signed this? He asked. Richard nodded and slid a page toward him. Yes, he said. 2 years ago. Ray scanned it, then exhaled slowly. Frank was worried, he said, more to himself than anyone. I knew it. Tanya's eyes flicked to Kyle for a second. Then she looked down at the documents, flipping through the attached exhibits with quick, practiced motions. This is real, she said quietly. Kyle snapped. Of course you'd say that. You always hated me. Tanya looked up, expression flat. I don't hate you, she said. I hated reconciling your numbers. That line landed hard. Ray's jaw tightened. The older drivers exchanged a glance. Kyle's face went pale again. What numbers? He demanded. Richard held up a hand. We're not debating feelings, he said. We're deciding actions. The audit notice requires documents next week. We need to preserve records immediately, restrict access, and prepare a response plan. Emma will outline the compliance steps. All eyes shifted to me. I placed my hands flat on the table. The wood felt smooth and cold under my palms. I looked at Ray, Tanya, the drivers. Then I looked at Kyle, who stared back with pure hostility. I'm not here to take anyone's paycheck, I said. I'm not here to blow up Frank's life's work. I'm here to keep the company alive long enough to tell the truth. Kyle laughed once, sharp. And what if the truth is you're wrong? I met his eyes. Then I'll be the one who took the hit, I said. Not the drivers, not the dispatchers, not the mechanics. Me. Ray nodded slowly, as if that mattered to him. Tanya slid a folder toward me. I've been waiting for someone to say that, she murmured. Kyle's leg bounced faster. I took a breath, steady. First, I said, we freeze non-essential spending and lock down all financial systems. Second, we preserve emails and route logs. Third, we hire an independent compliance consultant to demonstrate cooperation. Fourth, we prepare to self-report any discrepancies we confirm. Kyle slammed his hand on the table. Self-report? He snapped. Are you trying to bury us? Ray's eyes narrowed. Kyle, he said quietly, if there's nothing there, self-reporting doesn't hurt. If there is something there, hiding it kills us. Kyle opened his mouth, then shut it. For the first time, he wasn't the loudest person in the room. Richard turned to Kyle. You will turn over all company access credentials today, he said. Phones, laptops, passwords. You will not delete or modify anything. You will not instruct anyone to alter records. If you do, you personally expose yourself. Kyle's face twisted. You can't do this to me, he said. Richard's voice was flat. Frank did it, he said, with his signature. Kyle looked around the table, realizing that the room had changed allegiance. Not because they loved me, not because they hated him, because they wanted to survive. And as the conference room settled into that heavy, inevitable silence, I felt the same certainty Lorraine had described. When people finally stop clapping, the truth becomes loud enough to hear. Kyle didn't hand over his credentials right away. He sat there with his jaw locked, staring at the table as if he could will the wood to split and swallow the documents. His legs stopped bouncing. That was worse. Stillness meant he was thinking. Kyle always acted like he was impulsive, but he could be patient when he needed to protect himself. Ray pushed a small plastic basket across the table toward Kyle. It was the kind of basket the country club used for pens and mints. Now it sat there like a collection tray. Phone, Ray said, plain and quiet. Kyle looked up at him, eyes hard. Who the hell are you to tell me what to do? Ray didn't blink. I'm the guy who keeps the trucks moving, he said. And I'm the guy who's going to have to look 50 drivers in the eye if this company collapses. Kyle's face flushed. He glanced at Tanya, then at the drivers. Nobody looked away. Nobody softened. Kyle pulled his phone from his pocket and dropped it into the basket with a heavy clack. Then his company laptop came next, slid across the table with a little shove, like he wanted the motion to be aggressive even if he was complying. He hesitated before pulling a key fob off his keyring. The plastic tag said Falcon Ridge Server Room. He held it for a second, thumb rubbing over the letters, then tossed it into the basket too. Richard watched without expression. Passwords, he said. Kyle's lips curled. You already have them, he said. Richard's eyes narrowed. Not your personal admin credentials, he said. The ones you've been using to access accounting and compliance files. Kyle's throat bobbed. He looked at my mother, who sat at the far end of the table like she'd been turned to stone. Her hands were wrapped around a bottle of water she hadn't opened. She wouldn't meet his eyes. Kyle finally spoke, voice tight. Fine, he said. He rattled off passwords in a fast, bitter tone, as if saying them out loud could somehow make them less damaging. Tanya wrote them down, her pen moving quickly, her face unreadable. When Kyle finished, he leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms. Happy? He said, voice dripping contempt. No, Tanya said simply, relieved. Kyle stared at her, shocked, then scoffed. You've been waiting for this, he said. Tanya didn't flinch. I've been waiting for accountability, she said. Big difference. Richard placed a folder in front of Ray. These are the preservation steps, he said. We're issuing a litigation hold effective immediately. No documents destroyed, no records altered. If anyone tries, we document it. Ray nodded, taking the folder like it was a tool he could actually use. The older driver with the wedding ring, his name was Marty, cleared his throat. What about payroll? He asked. His voice was rough, like gravel. We got guys depending on that check. Tail sops. I looked at him. Payroll stays, I said. Nothing changes for employees unless it has to. Kyle laughed once. Listen to her, he said. She talks like she's already in charge. I didn't react. I kept my eyes on Marty. If anyone asks, I said, you tell them the company is cooperating with a federal audit and stabilizing operations. No rumors, no panic. The trucks keep moving, the drivers keep getting paid. Ray nodded again. Tanya's shoulders lowered slightly, like that answer eased something tight in her chest. Kyle's eyes narrowed at me. So what? He said. You're going to play savior while you drag my name through the mud? I looked at him. You did that yourself, I said. I'm just not scrubbing it off anymore. Richard stood. I'm calling Keene, he said. We need Lorraine's affidavit and any supporting documentation she prepared. If the audit goes badly, we may need to self-disclose. To having port, Kyle's head snapped up. Self-disclose, he repeated, voice rising. You people are insane. You're going to volunteer information to the government? Richard's tone stayed calm. If the alternative is them finding it first and assuming we tried to hide it? Yes, he said. Kyle shoved his chair back. It scraped loudly on the floor. I'm not sitting here while you hand them my throat, he snapped. Ray's voice turned harder. Sit down, he said. Kyle's eyes flashed. You can't tell me. I can, Ray said. And I am. Because if you walk out right now, every person in that room will remember the CEO who bailed when the heat hit. Kyle's face went tight. He looked around the table again, searching for someone to side with him. My mother stared down at her hands. Marty looked like he'd had enough. Tanya looked tired, not scared. Richard looked unmoved. There was no one left for Kyle to lean on. Kyle sat back down, breathing hard. Richard stepped out to make his call, leaving the door half open. The hum of the club's air conditioning filled the gaps. Somewhere in the hall, I heard laughter that sounded forced, brittle. The memorial event had not recovered. People were probably pretending it was fine because nobody wanted to be the first one to admit it wasn't. My mother finally spoke, voice thin. Emma, she whispered. What did Frank think you would do? I turned my head toward her. She looked older now, not just from grief, but from the sudden weight of reality. Frank thought I would keep the company clean, I said. Lorraine thought I would keep it alive. My mother swallowed. And Kyle? She asked, almost inaudible. I didn't dodge it. Lorraine thought Kyle would keep taking, I said. And Frank wanted to believe he wouldn't. Kyle's head jerked toward me. Don't talk like you knew him better than I did, he snapped. I met his eyes. I knew the parts of him you ignored, I said. Kyle's mouth opened, then closed. He didn't have a comeback that didn't make him look worse. Richard came back in 10 minutes later, face set. Keene is sending additional documents by encrypted link, he said. Lorraine executed an affidavit detailing the irregularities she found and her communications with Frank. It includes exhibits, bank records, invoice samples, and internal email chains. Kyle's face went pale again. Exhibits, he muttered, as if the word itself made him sick. Richard continued. Keene also confirmed Lorraine had the trust filed with the corporate governance binder and notarized copies deposited with 2 separate custodians. It is not going away. Kyle stood again, pacing. This is unbelievable, he said. She hates me. She's always hated me. She wanted you, Emma. She wanted you because you're the quiet one she could control. I kept my voice calm. Lorraine didn't want me because she could control me, I said. She wanted me because she couldn't control you. Kyle's face twisted. He pointed at Tanya. Tell them, he said. Tell them you never saw me steal anything. Tanya didn't look up from her notebook. You didn't steal in front of me, she said. You hid behind invoices. That's worse. Kyle spun toward Marty. Marty, he said, voice pleading now, desperate. You've known me since I was a kid. You know I wouldn't. Marty's face stayed hard. I know you, he said. That's why I'm not shocked. That sentence landed like a door slamming. Kyle stopped pacing. His eyes darted to the door. For a second, I thought he might run. Not physically, Kyle wasn't the type to sprint, but he might bolt emotionally, explode, destroy something, to reclaim control. Instead, he did what he always did when cornered. He tried to flip the story. This is about inheritance, he said, voice loud. This is about Emma being bitter. She's always been bitter. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Everyone in that room had already moved beyond his narrative. Richard slid a printed copy of the audit notice across the table toward Ray and Tanya. We have 6 days, he said. We need a complete internal review before the auditors arrive. Emma will lead compliance response. Tanya will secure financial records. Ray will handle operational continuity. Kyle laughed, sharp and bitter. And what do I do? He asked. Richard's eyes met his. You cooperate, he said. You provide access. You answer questions. and you do not represent the company to any external party until further notice. Kyle's face went red. You're sidelining me, he spat. Richard's voice turned colder. Yes, he said. Because the trust requires it. And because it's prudent. Kyle turned toward my mother again, almost begging. My mother finally looked up at him. Her eyes were wet, but something inside her had shifted. Kyle, she said softly, did you do something that could get the company in trouble? Kyle's mouth opened. His face tightened. He could have lied. He could have done what he always did, deny, until my mother soothed him and made the problem disappear. But this time the room wasn't just my mother. This time there were documents. This time there was a federal audit notice. This time there was a trust with Frank's signature. Kyle's voice came out strained. I did what I had to, he said. The room went still. My mother's face crumpled. What does that mean? She whispered. Kyle's eyes flashed with anger, as if he hated that she'd forced him into honesty. It means the company needed cash, he snapped. It means Frank left us with obligations. It means I made decisions. You want to run a business. You make decisions. 8. Tanya's pen stopped. Ray's jaw tightened. Richard's voice was quiet but sharp. What decisions, Kyle? He asked. Kyle's chest rose and fell. He looked around the room, and I realized he'd gone too far. He'd admitted just enough to poison himself. I moved money, Kyle said, voice defensive. I shifted it. It was temporary. It was for growth. My mother pressed a hand to her mouth. Marty leaned back, eyes narrowing. Richard's gaze hardened. Moved money from where? He asked. Kyle's lips tightened. He didn't answer. Richard nodded slowly, like the silence was its own confession. Kyle's eyes went to me, full of hatred now. You wanted this, he said. You wanted me to fall. I looked at him and felt nothing warm. Just that cold, clean certainty again. I wanted you to stop, I said. You chose falling. Richard stood. Meeting adjourned, he said. We reconvene in 2 hours with Keene's exhibits. Until then, nobody leaves town. Nobody calls anyone outside this room. And Kyle, he paused, eyes narrowing. If anything disappears from those records, I will personally make sure the auditors know exactly when and why. Kyle stared at him like he'd never been threatened by someone who actually had power. As we filed out, my mother walked beside me, her steps unsteady. Emma, she whispered, is there any way to fix this? I looked at the hallway ahead, at the closed doors, at the polished wood, and the quiet that felt like a courtroom. There's a way to survive it, I said. But fixing it? I shook my head once. That would have required Kyle to stop months ago. And behind us, in that conference room, Kyle stood alone for a moment, staring at the papers that had finally made his life real. When we stepped back into the main hall, it felt like walking onto a stage after the audience has already decided the play is bad. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Heads turned. People tried to read our faces the way people read weather. My mother's mascara had smudged slightly under her eyes. She didn't notice. Kyle came out last, shoulders squared, expression fixed, still trying to look like the man everyone had toasted an hour earlier. The photographer lowered his camera like he wasn't sure what story he was supposed to capture now. Kyle forced a laugh and clapped his hands once. All right, he said loudly, smiling too wide. We're going to take a short break. Just some boring legal stuff. Nothing to worry about. Grab another drink. No one moved right away. A few people smiled politely. A cousin picked up her phone and typed something fast. 2 older women near the dessert table leaned close and whispered, eyes fixed on my mother. The air felt thick again, like the heaters were back on even though they weren't. I didn't return to my table. I walked toward the side exit that led to a small patio overlooking the lake. I needed air that wasn't recycled through family tension. The patio was empty. The lake wind was cold enough to raise goosebumps on my arms. I wrapped my hands around the metal railing and stared at the water. Behind me, the door opened. My mother stepped outside, water bottle in hand, shoulders hunched as if she was trying to make herself smaller. Emma, she said softly. I didn't turn right away. If you're going to ask me to stop, I said, don't. My mother's breath caught. I wasn't going to ask you to stop, she whispered. Then, after a beat, I finally looked at her. Her face was pale. Her lips were slightly parted like she was still trying to catch up to everything. She was a woman who'd spent years believing love could smooth out consequences. And now she was watching consequences sharpen into something real. I didn't know, she said, voice trembling. About the fake vendor. About any of it. I swear. I studied her for a second. I believed she didn't know the specifics. My mother wasn't a planner. She was an enabler. She made space for Kyle to do what he did by refusing to look. I know you didn't know, I said. But you didn't want to know. My mother flinched, as if the wind had slapped her. That's not fair, she whispered. It's true, I said. Every time Frank tried to raise a concern about Kyle, you told him he was being too hard. Every time I asked you to hold Kyle accountable, you told me I was too sensitive. You trained all of us to prioritize comfort over truth. My mother's eyes filled again. I just wanted peace, she said. I nodded once. And Kyle used that, I said. He used it the way he uses everything. My mother's hands tightened around the water bottle, plastic crinkling. He's my son, she whispered, like that was both a defense and a confession. I looked out at the lake again. I know, I said. That's the problem. We stood there in the cold wind for a moment, listening to muted voices through the door. The party was still happening in fragments, like people trying to keep dancing after the music stopped. My phone buzzed. This time it was a call. Richard, I answered. Yeah, I said. Keen's exhibits are in, Richard said. His voice was tight. We're printing them now. You need to see this. I'm coming, I said. I ended the call and looked at my mother. They have the evidence, I said. My mother's face went blank. Evidence, she repeated, like she was tasting the word and finding it bitter. We went back inside. The noise hit us again. Voices, clinking glasses, forced laughter. Kyle stood near the microphone talking to a small cluster of people, smiling like a man trying to keep a boat afloat by bailing with his hands. When he saw me, his smile hardened for half a second, then smoothed again. Richard waited near the hallway, papers in his hands. Ray and Tanya were with him. Tanya's face looked grayer now. Ray's jaw was clenched. Richard led us into the conference room again and shut the door. The stack of printed exhibits sat in the center of the table like a brick. Tanya had placed paper clips and sticky notes around it like she'd already been marking the worst parts. Richard didn't waste time. Lorraine's affidavit is 12 pages, he said. She outlines the irregularities and her verification steps. There are attached bank statements, copies of invoices, and internal emails. Kyle paced along the wall, restless. Affidavit? He scoffed. From a dying woman? Richard's eyes cut to him. A dying woman who notarized it, he said. And whose exhibits match your bank transfers. Kyle stopped pacing. My bank transfers? He repeated, voice rising. Tanya flipped one page toward him without looking up. Yes, she said. Kyle snatched the page and scanned it. His eyes moved fast. His face lost color. He looked up sharply. This isn't mine, he said. It's Northline Fleet Solutions, Tanya said, tapping the page. Payments routed to a business account that leads to a UPS store address. Lorraine pulled the banking records. She traced the account's authorized user. It's you. Kyle's mouth opened, then shut. His throat worked like he was trying to swallow a rock. Ray leaned forward. Kyle, he said quietly. Tell me there's an explanation. Kyle snapped. There is. Richard slid another page across. There's more, he said. The route logs. Kyle's eyes narrowed. What about them? Richard pointed. Routes logged as completed that have no corresponding GPS data, he said. Fuel reimbursements claimed on trips that didn't happen. Subcontractor certifications copied and reused. Kyle's voice rose. That's clerical, he barked. That's office mistakes. I know. Tanya looked up finally, eyes flat. It's not clerical when the errors always benefit you, she said. My mother sat at the far end of the table, hands gripping the water bottle again. Her eyes moved across the pages with slow horror, like she was watching her son become someone she could no longer pretend was misunderstood. Kyle tried a new tactic. He turned toward her. Mom, he said, voice softer, pleading. I was trying to keep it afloat. I was trying to grow it. Frank left us with debt. He left us with obligations. My mother's mouth trembled. Kyle. she whispered. Why didn't you tell me? Kyle's eyes flashed with frustration. Because you would have panicked, he snapped, then caught himself. Because I didn't want to worry you. My mother's gaze dropped to the paper in front of her. There was a highlighted section of an email. I saw her eyes track the words, then widen. She looked up slowly. Kyle, she said, voice small. What is this email? Kyle froze. What email? My mother's finger shook as she pointed at the page. Delay driver reimbursement. We need cash for the lake house weekend. She read out loud. Her voice cracked on the last words. Lake house weekend? Kyle's face went rigid. He didn't look at her. He didn't look at anyone. He stared at the wall like he could climb out of the room with his eyes. Ray's voice turned hard. You used reimbursement money for a weekend trip? He asked. Kyle's voice came out defensive. It wasn't. It was temporary. Tanya let out a short, humorless laugh. Temporary, she repeated. Kyle snapped. You all act like I was stealing for fun. I was investing. I was moving money to cover gaps. The company needed it. Richard's voice was quiet. Not for weekends, he said. Kyle whirled toward him. You don't understand pressure, he yelled. You don't understand what it's like to be the one everyone expects to succeed. Frank was sick. Mom was falling apart. The drivers were complaining. The contracts were demanding. Somebody had to be strong. Ray leaned forward, eyes cold. Strength isn't stealing, he said. Kyle's face twisted. You think you're so righteous? He spat. You've all been cashing checks. I kept coming. You're welcome. That arrogance, right there, was the real Kyle. Not the smiling CEO. Not the grieving son. The man who believed other people owed him gratitude for not letting the machine stop while he picked parts off it for himself. My mother stood suddenly. Her chair scraped loudly. Stop, she said, voice shaking but loud enough to cut through him. Just stop. Kyle froze, stunned. My mother rarely raised her voice at him. She held up the paper in her trembling hand. Frank worked himself into the ground, she said, tears spilling now. He missed birthdays. He missed holidays. He missed sleep. He did it because he believed this company meant something. And you... Kyle's face went red. Mom! No, my mother said, voice cracking. Don't. Don't. Mom me. Answer me. Did you take money that wasn't yours? Kyle's mouth opened. He looked around the room. He saw Tanya's calm certainty. He saw Ray's fury. He saw Richard's legal coldness. He saw the driver's disappointment. And he saw me. Quiet, steady, not begging him to be better anymore. Kyle's voice came out flat. I moved it, he said. My mother's shoulders sagged, as if the last thread holding her denial snapped. She covered her mouth and made a sound like grief, raw and ugly, the kind that doesn't care who hears it. Richard spoke into that silence. This changes our approach, he said. If Kyle admits moving funds, we need to determine whether it constitutes fraud, misappropriation, or both, the auditors will ask. We need to be prepared. Kyle turned toward me, eyes burning. I looked at him and felt nothing like happiness. No, I said. I'm finished pretending. Outside, somewhere beyond the closed door, the party continued to unravel. And inside, the evidence sat on the table like a verdict, making it impossible for Kyle or my mother to go back to the story they'd been living in. The meeting didn't end with a dramatic scream or someone storming out. It ended the way real consequences usually begin quietly, with lists and tasks and people finally doing what they should have done months ago. Richard assigned roles. Tanya started pulling reports. Ray made calls to dispatch to keep the evening routes running. Marty and the other driver, Len, left to tell a few key supervisors that payroll was safe and rumors needed to stop. Kyle sat in the corner chair like a man who'd been told his body no longer belonged to him. He kept rubbing his palms on his suit pants. Slow, repetitive, as if he could wipe off what had just been revealed. My mother stopped crying at some point, but her eyes stayed swollen and red. She looked at Kyle like she was seeing him through a dirty window, still her son, but distorted. When Richard finally said we were done for the day, it was almost evening. The light through the conference room window had shifted to that dull gray-blue color that makes everything look colder. The memorial event was basically over. People had left in clusters, quiet and uncomfortable. The dessert table was half full. the cake untouched except for one messy slice someone had cut out of impatience. The banner still hung crooked. Kyle walked out of the conference room ahead of us, shoulders stiff, not speaking. He didn't look back. He didn't try to hug my mother. He didn't ask how she was. He couldn't. He was already building the next story in his head, one where he was the victim and I was the villain. In the parking lot, the wind off the lake hit hard. My coat wasn't thick enough. My mother stood by her car, keys in hand, staring at the windshield like she'd forgotten how to drive. "Come home with me," she said suddenly, voice small. "Just tonight." I looked at her. The request wasn't about comfort. It was about control. If I stayed in her house, she could talk. She could cry. She could bargain. She could try to stitch the family back together before the truth became permanent. "I'm not staying at the house," I said. "I booked a hotel." My mother flinched. "Emma, please. I can't be alone with him." I glanced toward Kyle's car. He was already inside it, hands on the steering wheel, staring straight ahead. His jaw was tight. His phone was gone. His laptop was gone. For the first time in his adult life, he looked cut off. "You're not alone," I said. "You have the truth. That's company." My mother's face tightened. "That's a cruel thing to say." I shook my head. "No," I said. "Cruel is letting someone destroy everything, while you call it love." I walked away before I could soften. That night, I sat alone in a bland hotel room off the highway, the kind with beige carpet and a humming mini-fridge. I ate a vending machine granola bar for dinner and opened my laptop, my personal one, not the company's, and wrote out the plan Lorraine had taught me. Keep the response factual. Keep the language clean. Don't get pulled into emotion. I sent emails to Richard, to Tanya, to Ray. I made a checklist for the audit. At 11:07 p.m., my phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "Can we talk?" I stared at it for a few seconds, then typed back, "Tomorrow." "We have work." She didn't reply. Over the next week, Falcon Ridge turned into a different kind of company. Not a celebratory legacy brand with banners and speeches, but a tight, anxious machine doing damage control. We locked down the servers. We preserved emails. We hired an outside compliance consultant, an older woman named Denise, who had spent 20 years dealing with federal audits and didn't flinch at Kyle's name or my mother's tears. Denise walked into the company headquarters like she owned the oxygen and started asking questions nobody had dared ask Kyle. When drivers came in to pick up route assignments, they looked around like they were waiting for the building to explode. Ray pulled them into small groups and told them the truth, in simple terms. The company was under audit, the company was cooperating, everyone would get paid. He didn't mention Kyle. He didn't have to. People already knew the vibe. People always know when leadership is rotten. They just wait for permission to say it out loud. Kyle, meanwhile, tried to fight back in the only way he could through my mother. He called her constantly. He cried. He shouted. He promised he could fix it. He said he'd pay everything back. He said he'd been under pressure. He said I was doing this to punish him for leaving me out of the inheritance, even though Frank's will hadn't even been the point. My mother came to the office one morning with red eyes and a swollen face and asked to talk to me privately. We sat in Frank's old office. The desk still had the faint smell of his aftershave in the wood, and the chair creaked the same way it always had. Frank had been a quiet man, but he'd filled space with presence. Sitting there now felt like sitting in a room with a ghost who didn't want me to lie. My mother clasped her hands in her lap. I didn't look away. Kyle says whatever he needs to say to avoid consequences, I replied. My mother's lips trembled. He says you've always hated him. I let out a slow breath. I don't hate him, I said. I just stopped protecting him. My mother's eyes filled again. I didn't protect him, she protested weakly. I leaned forward slightly. Mom, I said, you protected him every time you asked me to be quiet. You protected him every time you told Frank he was being too hard. You protected him every time you told yourself Kyle's intent mattered more than his impact. My mother stared at the floor. For a long time she didn't speak. Then she whispered, I thought if I loved him enough, he would turn out okay. That was the most honest thing she'd said in years. I nodded once. I know, I said. But love isn't a leash. It's not a shield. It's not a substitute for boundaries. My mother wiped her cheeks. What happens to him? She asked. I didn't sugarcoat it. If the auditors confirm fraud, contracts can be suspended, I said. The company could lose veteran preference status. There could be civil penalties. There could be criminal referrals, depending on scope and intent. My mother made a small sound, like she'd been punched. Criminal? She whispered. I kept my voice steady. Maybe, I said. And Kyle made that risk real. The audit team arrived on Monday morning at 9 a.m. 3 people, 2 men and 1 woman. They wore plain clothes, carried laptops and clipboards, and didn't care about family drama. They introduced themselves, shook hands, and began asking for specific files. Their questions were simple and cold. What is the fuel reimbursement process? Who signs off? Who approves subcontractor certifications? Where are route logs stored? Who has admin access? Denise handled most of it. I sat in the room and answered when needed. Tanya provided records. Ray provided operational context. Richard sat quietly, taking notes, intervening only when necessary. Kyle wasn't allowed in the building. He stood outside in the parking lot on the first day, leaning against his car, arms crossed, watching the auditors walk in like he was watching strangers enter his home. He looked like he might vomit. When he saw me through the lobby window, his face twisted with hatred. At noon on the second day, Denise came into my temporary office, closed the door, and sat down heavily. They found it, she said. My stomach didn't drop. It hardened. How bad? I asked. Denise slid a printed report across my desk. Worse than we hoped, she said. Not catastrophic yet, but the pattern is clear. I skimmed the summary. Duplicate invoices. Misreported mileage. Unsupported subcontractor claims. A fake vendor account tied to Kyle. Email instructions to clean files. Everything Lorraine had warned me about, now confirmed by federal eyes. Denise looked at me. You did the right thing stepping in, she said. If you hadn't, this would have gotten ugly fast. I stared at the paper and felt the weight of it settle into my bones. The truth was no longer just ours. It belonged to the government now. It belonged to the record. And for the first time since the memorial, I understood that the real revenge wasn't public humiliation. It was permanence. Kyle couldn't charm his way out of a federal finding. He couldn't talk his way out of a paper trail. He couldn't make my mother cry enough to erase it. That afternoon, Richard called an emergency board meeting. When we sat down around the table, he didn't speak gently. The auditors are recommending immediate suspension of Kyle's operational role, he said. And they're requesting a referral package for further review. My mother put her hand over her mouth again. Ray stared at the table. Tanya closed her eyes briefly. And I sat there, hands flat on the wood, feeling the last piece of Kyle's old world crack, because now it wasn't just my word against his, it was the government's. The emergency board meeting happened in the same plain conference room where Kyle had first realized he wasn't the loudest person anymore. The coffee pot on the side table was burnt again. The air conditioner too cold. Outside the window, the yard behind the headquarters was patchy and brown, still waiting for spring to fully arrive. Everything felt unfinished, like the world didn't know it had just crossed a line. Richard laid the auditor's preliminary findings on the table. The pages were stapled, clean, and impossible to argue with. He didn't call it a verdict, but it felt like one. Tanya had already highlighted sections in yellow, her way of bracing herself. Ray sat with his hands clasped, elbows on the table, staring at the paperwork like he was trying to calculate how many jobs were hanging in the balance. My mother sat at the far end, shoulders slumped. She'd stopped wearing pearls. She wore a plain sweater and jeans now, like she didn't have the strength for costumes. She looked like a woman finally forced to stand in her own life, instead of hiding in her son's. Richard spoke first, voice steady. The auditors are recommending immediate restriction of Kyle Mercer's access to all company systems, he said. They will also be compiling a referral package for further review. That does not automatically mean criminal charges, but it increases the likelihood of deeper investigation. My mother made a small sound, half breath, half grief. Ray looked down at his hands. Marty, who'd come in as a board advisor, stared straight ahead, jaw tight. Tanya cleared her throat. The pattern is clear, she said quietly. This wasn't a one-time mistake. Richard nodded. Exactly, he said. Which means we need to act as if the government will assume intent. Our job is to protect the company, and demonstrate corrective action. Ray looked up. What does that mean for Kyle? He asked. His voice was controlled, but there was anger underneath, the anger of a man who'd carried other people's messes too long. Richard didn't sugarcoat it. We formally remove him from any leadership role, he said. We document it. My mother's hands trembled. Remove him, she whispered, as if saying the word might make it less real. I looked at her. Mom? I said gently. It's already happened. Today is just the paperwork catching up. She flinched, then nodded, slow and defeated. He's my son, she whispered again, softer than before. I know, I said. And this is still necessary. Richard slid another document across the table. Under the compliance trust terms, Emma remains acting trustee until the audit is resolved and corrective measures are verified, he said. The board will vote to ratify the action plan and the restriction of Kyle's access. Ray exhaled slowly. Let's vote, he said. The vote wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, one by one. Yes, yes, yes. Tanya's yes was firm. Ray's yes was grim. Marty's yes was tired, but certain. My mother hesitated, eyes closing briefly, then whispered, yes. It's problem side. Richard wrote it down, finalizing it in ink. Motion passes, he said. It should have felt like victory. It didn't. It felt like cleaning up after a fire necessary, exhausting, and still smelling like smoke. Kyle found out within an hour. Not from us. From his own instincts. He drove to the headquarters and stood outside the locked front doors like he could intimidate the building into opening. He didn't have a key fob anymore. He didn't have admin access. He didn't have the ability to walk in and bark orders. Ray called me from the lobby. He's here, he said. I'm coming, I replied. I walked down the hallway toward the glass doors. My footsteps echoed softly. When I reached the lobby, I saw Kyle through the glass, standing on the concrete with his hands on his hips. His face was flushed. His hair was messy, like he'd run his hands through it 100 times. His car sat behind him at an angle, parked like he'd stopped without thinking. My mother stood behind me, trembling. Please, she whispered. Let me talk to him. I didn't stop her. This was her mess too. She needed to see it clearly. Ray unlocked the door, but kept the security latch in place, so it would only open a few inches. He didn't do it to be cruel. He did it because Kyle had been unpredictable all week, and because the world had changed. Kyle stepped forward immediately. What the hell is this? He snapped. Unlock the door. Dade me existence 10 min. Ray's voice was flat. No, he said. Not until you calm down. Kyle's eyes darted past Ray and landed on me. His face twisted with rage. You did this, he said. You stole my company. I stepped closer to the door, close enough that he could see my expression clearly. I didn't steal anything, I said. I stepped in because you put it in danger. Kyle laughed, sharp and bitter. Danger, he repeated. You're acting like I was trying to destroy it. You were, I said, calm. Maybe not on purpose. But your actions don't care about your intent. Kyle's gaze flicked to my mother behind me. Mom, he said, voice shifting instantly, softer, pleading. Tell them this is insane. Tell them to let me in. Tell them to stop listening to her. My mother stepped forward, face tight. Kyle, she said, voice trembling. Did you really take money from the company for that lake house weekend? Kyle's face hardened. Are you kidding me? He snapped. You're going to throw that at me now? After everything I've done for you? My mother flinched. Just answer, she whispered. Kyle's eyes flashed. Yes, he said, voice sharp. I did. And I was going to put it back. You think Frank never moved money around? You think Ray never bent rules? I'm the only one getting punished because Emma wants to feel important. Ray's jaw tightened. Don't drag me into your mess, he said. Kyle ignored him. He leaned closer to the glass, eyes locked on me. You always wanted this, he said. You always wanted to be the one in charge. You're finally getting your revenge. I didn't raise my voice. My revenge isn't you being locked out, I said. My revenge is that the truth finally has witnesses. Kyle's breath came hard. Witnesses? He muttered, like the word tasted like blood. My mother's voice broke. Kyle's face twisted. Frank didn't trust me, he snapped. Frank trusted her. Frank trusted Lorraine. Frank treated me like I was always one mistake away from being nothing. My mother's eyes widened. Because you were acting like it, she said, and the shock on her face when the words came out told me she didn't even know she had that sentence inside her until that moment. Kyle froze, stunned, like he'd been slapped. My mother's shoulders shook. I kept choosing you, she said, tears spilling again. I kept choosing you because I thought if I did, you'd be okay. And all you did was take. You took from Frank. You took from the drivers. You took from me. Kyle's face reddened. I did it for us, he shouted. My mother shook her head, sobbing now. No, she said. You did it for you, and I let you. That was the moment the real collapse happened. Not the audit, not the trust documents, not the board vote. The collapse was my mother finally saying out loud what she'd been avoiding her whole life. Kyle stared at her through the glass, mouth open, eyes wild. For a second, I thought he might beg. Then his face hardened into something colder. Fine, he said, voice low. If you're all against me, then you can have it. You can have your precious company. But don't call me when it falls apart. Don't call me when the government destroys everything Frank built. He stepped back, breathing hard. Then he turned and walked to his car. My mother pressed her hand to the glass as if she could stop him with her palm. Kyle, she whispered. He didn't turn around. He drove away fast enough that his tires threw gravel. The next few months were brutal but clean. We worked with the auditors. We corrected records. We terminated contracts with questionable vendors. We paid back reimbursements where required. We lost a few contracts, but not all. The company shrank, but it didn't die. Ray held operations steady. Tanya rebuilt financial controls. Denise stayed until the federal team confirmed the corrective action plan was real. Kyle faced civil penalties. His certifications were revoked. He tried to sue to challenge the trust, but the documents held. Hisman Tribes of 2-3 Point, tense 5 plays. He tried to tell people I'd taken everything, but the story didn't stick because the audit findings were public enough in the right circles. He couldn't outrun a paper trail. My mother sold the lake house. She stopped going to church for a while because she couldn't stand the pity. She stopped calling me to beg for peace. When she called, it was different now. Short. Honest. One morning, months later, I came into the office early. The sun was just coming up, throwing pale light across the parking lot. The building was quiet. The only sound was the HVAC hum and the faint click of my own shoes. I unlocked my drawer and pulled out Lorraine's last letter. I'd read it 100 times, but that morning I read it again. Her handwriting was firm even near the end. She didn't write about revenge. She wrote about consequences. She wrote about how some people don't learn until there's a cost they can't pay back. She wrote, simply, that Frank deserved a company that stayed clean after he was gone. I folded the letter and put it back in the drawer. Then I opened my laptop and started reviewing the day's reports. Because that was what justice looked like in real life. Not shouting. Not humiliation. Just the quiet work of making sure the truth stayed in place. And somewhere out there, Kyle was living in a world where charm no longer mattered. Because the one thing he'd never respected, the paperwork had finally become the only thing anyone believed.